The truck's engine growls steadily, like an insatiable beast that never stops devouring the road. Outside, darkness stretches as far as the eye can see. The only thing cutting through the night is the glow of the headlights, illuminating the thin white line that marks the road, a fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. The hum of the asphalt, the constant buzz of the cabin, and the wind rattling against the windows blend into a repetitive, almost hypnotic rhythm, one that's all too familiar to those of us who spend our lives driving through the endless highways of America. My name is Hank, and I've been a trucker for over 20 years. I've crossed this country more times than I can count, north to south, east to west. I know these roads like the back of my hand, but there's something I can't explain, something that's always been there, lurking in the shadows of these long, lonely nights. There are rules, unspoken rules among us truckers. Rules no one dares to question, not because we're scared, but because we know that breaking them means playing with something far bigger than ourselves. The road, this old companion, has its own way of doing things. It's not like other places. With every mile, I can feel the weight of its history pressing down. Every turn carries a silence that feels heavier than it should. It's like the road knows us, like we're always being watched, followed, like the highway itself has a will of its own. But the strangest thing isn't what I see out there. It's what I don't see. Every day, the roads feel emptier, towns slipping by like ghosts, gas stations with no life in them, rest stops barely occupied by a handful of drivers, and the sky always gray, always starless, like the universe itself has decided to look away. The highways, they're more than just roads, they're gateways. And those unspoken rules we whisper to each other, carried on the wind like secrets, they have everything to do with that. Rules a rookie would never understand. And honestly, I wish I never had either. The first rule of all, never stop at certain gas stations. Those words, spoken by an old friend who doesn't drive anymore, have been burned into my mind, like an echo that never fades. He looked me dead in the eye when he said it, with that tired, haunted expression, and added, "You don't know what's waiting for you there." At first, I thought it was just another road story. But then that night, I saw exactly what he meant. The radio crackled, static, unsettling, like it was trying to tell me something. My eyes drifted from the road for just a second, and that was enough to spot a gas station up ahead, sitting in the dim glow of the night. It was small, barely lit, but it felt like it was waiting for me. A strange presence pulling at my attention. Not there, I whispered to myself. I kept driving, didn't stop, but the feeling stuck to me like a shadow, something I couldn't shake. I can't explain it, but it's the kind of thing you just know when you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. Something was wrong with that place. Something that wasn't meant to be touched, spoken about, or even acknowledged. And just like always, I followed the rule. I didn't stop. That empty highway, that thin line of light cutting through the dark, was all I had. And somehow, I knew that pressing forward, never looking back, was the only thing keeping me safe. I was about to learn that these rules might be the only thing protecting us from something far worse. Something that watches from the roads. Something that doesn't have a name. The truck's headlights sliced through the darkness with an almost surgical precision, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, no end in sight, and the towering pines lining the highway swayed in the wind, shadows shifting in ways that didn't feel natural. The clock on the dashboard read 2:30 a.m., and I hadn't seen another soul in hours. My only company was the hum of the engine and the muffled sound of the road beneath me. When the next gas station appeared around the bend, a strange sensation crawled up my spine. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it. Dim, flickering lights, a rusting fuel pump with peeling paint, and an old sign swaying in the wind. But the stillness, the lack of movement, that's what unsettled me. No lights inside the store, no sound coming from anywhere. Nothing but an eerie, suffocating silence. I knew what that meant. I'd heard the stories, the warnings from veteran drivers. Don't stop at places like this. Something was always waiting to happen at these empty stations, something no trucker should ever witness up close. It wasn't some old superstition. It was a survival rule. I pressed the gas pedal, passing it by with my heart pounding harder than it should. The truck's headlights swept across the entrance for just a second, just long enough for me to see the faces. They weren't human, but they were there, lurking in the shadows, just watching. Their faces were pale, almost translucent, and their eyes were huge, blank, empty, staring right through me. I looked away fast, but the image was already burned into my mind. "You're losing it," I muttered under my breath. My hands were shaking slightly, but I knew I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. That rule was carved into my bones. Never stop there. The truth is, on roads like this, loneliness is your only real companion. And in moments like that, it's easy to start questioning your sanity. But when the road starts whispering, when you feel the weight of something unseen, something watching, you learn not to ignore the signs. I knew that if I stopped, I might never leave. As the gas station's dim glow faded in my rearview mirror, the tension in the air only got heavier. I couldn't tell if it was just paranoia, or if there really was something out there, some presence feeding off lonely truckers who wandered too close to its trap. And then a thought crossed my mind. What if that store wasn't really empty? What if someone was waiting for me? I didn't want to know, so I just kept driving. Then the radio crackled, but it wasn't the usual static I was used to. It was a voice, low, almost a whisper, dragging itself through the frequencies like something crawling out of the dark. "Don't stop at places like that, Hank. You don't know what you might find there." Fear turned my blood to ice. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Maybe it was just exhaustion, the road playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, someone who knew more than I did. The rule had never felt more real. For a second, I thought about calling my friend Bill. He'd always known more than most about these roads. But I gave up just as fast. My phone had been out of service for hours, and any attempt to reach the outside world felt pointless. The road was swallowing me, pulling me further away from everything. And the strangest part, I wasn't even sure if I was moving forward or backward. The highway stretched endlessly, like it was leading me somewhere nameless, somewhere outside of time itself. I knew that wouldn't be the last gas station like that. The road, my old companion, had too many secrets to tell, and each one was bound to be more dangerous than the last. I was about to learn that these rules weren't just precautions. They were survival. The night was getting thicker, as if the sky had swallowed every last star. The air inside the truck felt heavy, suffocating, like the road itself was trying to pull me under. I hadn't seen another soul for hours, and then I did. A silhouette appeared on the side of the highway. It was a woman, tall, thin, dark hair, wearing a worn-out jacket. She stood there at the edge of the road, lifting one hand in a slow, deliberate wave. That wasn't normal. At this hour, on these roads, the only things you usually saw were shifting shadows and the glint of animal eyes reflecting your headlights. Hitchhikers were practically a myth out here, a taboo. On a road like this, you never pick up a hitchhiker. And yet, despite every instinct telling me to keep driving, I found myself slowing down. She approached the truck with an unsettling calm, her step steady, deliberate. When she reached my window, she locked eyes with me, and her eyes were empty. Not just emotionless, but hollow, like there was nothing behind them. Like her soul had wandered off to some faraway place and never returned. "Are you heading north?" she asked. Her voice was soft but firm, slicing through the silence of the night with an eerie precision. There was something strange about the way she spoke, like she already knew the answer, like she knew me, and worse, like she knew what was coming. She was waiting for something, waiting for me to be weak enough to listen. "Yeah," I said, hesitating. "Why are you out here? At this hour?" She smiled, just a small, faint curl of her lips, but it fell off, forced, like a mask. "I'm here because you're going to need help," she said. "It's time for you to learn about the roads." I never believed in coincidences. Not out here. Every person, every event on the highway happened for a reason. And I knew this moment meant something. I just didn't know what. My gut screamed at me to hit the gas and never look back. But in the back of my mind, there was another voice. A whisper, quiet but insistent. Listen to her. I was a seasoned trucker. I knew the rules. I knew what was at stake. And yet, standing there on that empty highway, staring into those vacant eyes, I felt like there was something more. "Why are you hitchhiking?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the wheel. The unease creeping into my chest was becoming impossible to ignore. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced around, scanning the darkness like she was making sure we were alone. Then, when her gaze returned to me, her eyes were even emptier, like whatever little life had been left in them was now completely gone. "Because you're going to take me to the right place," she said. Her voice was different now, almost mystical, like she wasn't talking about the highway, like she was talking about something beyond it. "But be careful," she added. "The road changes, and you're about to see it for yourself." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't normal. The road doesn't change. It just is. But the way she said it, like it was an undeniable fact, made the impossible feel real. Like something was moving in the shadows, something she knew was there, something I wasn't meant to understand, something she wanted me to see. "Are you saying you know what's going to happen?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. I knew I was stepping onto a path I couldn't turn back from, but at the same time, there was something captivating about her, something that made me want to know more. Fear was always there, lurking beneath the surface. But so was curiosity. She smiled again, but this time it felt distant, like she was saying goodbye to me, before I even got the chance to see what was hiding behind her empty eyes. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. Then her smile faded. "Just remember, not everything you see is real." And with that, she got into the truck. I didn't know if I had just made a mistake, if picking her up was the worst decision I could have made. But I did know one thing. My journey had changed. The road, once familiar, now felt like a long, endless stretch of unanswered questions. A mystery I could no longer solve on my own. She sat in the passenger seat silent, completely still. But something felt off. I tried to glance at her from the corner of my eye, but I couldn't. The harder I tried to make sense of it, the more I felt it. The road wasn't just a road anymore. It was something else, something alive, and she wasn't really here, at least not in the way a person should be. There was something wrong with her, and then she finally spoke, breaking the thick, suffocating silence. "You're going to have to follow the rules, Hank." Her voice was low, steady. "Or the road will swallow you whole." The sound of the truck's engine, once so familiar and reassuring, now felt muffled, like it was coming from far away. The road ahead looked the same, but everything around me was changing. The sky felt heavier, the air thicker, and the woman beside me remained silent. But I could feel it. She was watching me, waiting for me to say something. Every move I made felt scrutinized, like I was being studied. And with every mile, the tension in the cab grew stronger. "You're not really listening, are you?" Her voice cut through the silence. It wasn't soft anymore. There was a sharpness to it now, an edge of impatience, like she was tired of waiting for me to catch on. I turned to look at her, and her eyes, they weren't human. They were empty, sure, but now it was like something was trying to push its way out from inside them. Something I couldn't fully see. Something lurking just beneath the surface of her expression. She wasn't just some hitchhiker. She wasn't just a passenger. She was here to show me something, or drag me into something. "You're telling me the roads, they have rules?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. I already knew the answer. I just didn't want to accept it. I knew there was something else out here, something beyond understanding, but my mind refused to acknowledge it. "Yes," she said flatly, "the roads have their own rules, and you're about to learn one of the most important ones." The road ahead started to shift, twisting in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The painted lines wavered like ripples on water, bending in the darkness. I could feel something watching us, waiting. Every turn felt sharper, tighter, and the deeper we drove, the stronger the feeling became. I couldn't stop. I couldn't, because if I did, I wasn't sure what would happen. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my chest tightening with anxiety. "What do you want from me?" She looked at me, her empty eyes locked onto mine, and simply said, "You'll learn, Hank. Everyone does. Eventually." Then she pointed ahead, to the dark road stretching out before us. "Look closely at where we're going, because this trip doesn't make sense. But you'll understand." I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. Up ahead, in the middle of the darkness, a faint light blinked. Just a tiny dot on the road. It was a rest area, but something was off about it. It was empty, motionless. No trucks parked, no souls in sight. Just that faint, blinking light, like a lighthouse abandoned in the middle of nowhere. "Don't you dare stop," she whispered, "or the road will swallow you whole." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, sweat dripping down my forehead. The feeling of being pulled toward that rest area was overwhelming. The road, my old companion, the one I thought I knew so well, now felt like a prison, a trap I couldn't escape. But I knew what she was telling me. It wasn't a choice. I pressed my foot harder on the accelerator and sped past the rest area without looking back. But the feeling that something was watching me, that something was now trailing me, didn't fade. In fact, it only grew stronger. I knew that whatever that place was, it was waiting for me, waiting to see if I'd be the next to fall into its trap. I kept driving, without a word, without anything else to say. The woman beside me, who hadn't spoken a word since, just stared at me, her empty eyes now looking even darker, as if she knew something was about to happen. And it did. The radio crackled again, louder this time. The voice I'd heard before, the one that sounded like a warning, was back. But now, the words were different, clearer. "You shouldn't have ignored the rest stop, Hank," the voice said, with a tone that seemed to come from deep inside the engine. "Now, you'll be one of them." "Who?" I yelled, fear overtaking me. "Who are you? What's happening?" The woman beside me began to laugh softly, a sound that held no joy, a laugh that seemed to come from somewhere far away, beyond the road. She leaned forward and whispered in my ear, "You're going home, Hank. The only problem is, your home isn't yours anymore." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just heading north anymore. I was heading to a place where the roads get lost, where there's no turning back, where time dissolves and everything you know disappears. I was heading to the heart of whatever had infiltrated these roads. And now, there was no going back. What happened next couldn't be explained by logic, because the road started to curve in ways it shouldn't. The white lines on the asphalt began to twist and tangle, as if they were alive. The sense that something was wrong grew stronger with each passing second. The truck's cabin, which had once been a refuge of solitude, now felt like a cage. It wasn't a straight road anymore. It wasn't my familiar route. It was something something different. I knew I was heading to a place where the rules of reality simply didn't apply. The woman beside me, silent until now, started to move with an unsettling calm. She didn't look at me, but her eyes were fixed on the road, as if she was seeing something I couldn't. For a moment, I wondered if she was controlling what was happening, or worse, if she was guiding me to the abyss. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice breaking the tense silence in the cabin. I didn't know if she was talking to me or to the road. "The road is calling you, Hank. You can't turn back now." I didn't know what she meant by that, but something inside me already did. Something much deeper than I was willing to accept. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to hold on to control. But the road, it seemed to stretch as if it were multiplying. The turns got sharper and the landmarks vanished. A gas station appeared to my left, but when I looked at it, I saw it disappear quickly, as if it had been erased from existence. It was like the road was distorting time and space. "You can't escape," she said again, with that empty tone. "This isn't a road, Hank. This is a maze. And every mistake you make takes you deeper." My mind was a mess. I understood what she was saying. I knew the roads. The roads weren't what they once were. They had a life of their own, a life that couldn't be understood by a simple trucker like me. I pressed the accelerator, trying to gain distance, trying to run from this feeling. But the road seemed to follow me, twisting, bending, defying any attempt to escape. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw a line of blinking lights in the distance, as if other vehicles were behind me. But with every turn, the lights vanished, leaving behind an even darker darkness. "It's not a race, Hank," the woman said, her eyes now glowing as if they were headlights. "Here in the maze, time is a prison, and you're not running away, you're running in." I didn't know what to believe anymore. The road stretched out before me forever, and every turn took me into a reality more and more distorted. I tried to stop several times, to ask for help, but the cabin was empty and the radio, always so familiar, only emitted unintelligible static. Then, the voice on the radio finally became clear, and it froze me to my bones. "You still don't understand, Hank. This road isn't your friend. It eats you slowly until you're lost, until you become part of it." I looked at the woman beside me, hoping she had an answer, but she was just there, still, her eyes locked ahead, as if nothing else mattered. I knew she knew more than she was letting on, but at that moment, it felt like nothing was real anymore. The road had its own will, its own desires. Every curve led me into a new nightmare, a new point of distortion. What happened next was something I would never forget. In the next curve, a massive shadow appeared ahead, something large enough to block my view entirely. I slowed down, my body in panic, but before I could think of swerving, the shadow materialized. It was a truck, but it wasn't just any truck. It was stopped in the middle of the road, completely black, with a deep, pulsating hum coming from its engine. The truck was empty, but the cabin seemed to glow from within, with an eerie, pulsating light as if it had a life of its own. I stopped my truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't breathe anymore. The woman beside me didn't move. She just watched with that vacant expression. "You have to make a choice, Hank," she said, her voice now echoing as if it came from an infinite distance. "You can keep going and get lost here forever, or you can face the truck and find out what's really waiting for you." I didn't know what to do. The truck in front of me looked like a doorway to an unknown place, but fear had paralyzed me. The road was collapsing around me, and I knew time was running out. I needed to decide. There I was, frozen, my truck immobilized in front of that huge shadow. The truck ahead seemed to be breathing, its lights flickering unsettlingly, as if waiting for my decision. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the cabin. The road, once a mere straight line, had now transformed into a dark abyss, a portal I didn't know whether to cross or avoid. The woman beside me didn't seem to care. She was still, her empty eyes fixed on the truck, as if waiting for an inevitable event. The silence in the cabin was deafening. I could feel the weight of the decision approaching, each second stretching like an increasing burden. I was being forced to choose, and I knew that any choice would have irreversible consequences. "Do you really think you can escape, Hank?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice had a tone of relentless coldness, as if she were starting to get bored with my hesitation. "You're trapped here, and every decision you make just takes you deeper." I looked at the truck, and then something started to happen. Its cabin, once illuminated only by a pulsating light, now seemed to expand, the light growing more intense, almost blinding. I could feel the heat radiating from it, but the strangest part was that I couldn't hear the sound of the engine, only that pulsating hum, as if the truck was alive, waiting for something. Then, the decision seemed to materialize before me, something beyond reason. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew that staying there as a bystander would not be an option. I took a deep breath, trying to keep control, but the feeling of being watched, of being tested, was overwhelming. Without thinking, I pressed the accelerator, driving toward the dark truck. The cabin vibrated with the acceleration, and the air seemed to compress around me, as if the road itself was closing in. The woman beside me, her expression unchanged, looked ahead without saying a word. As I got closer to the truck, the pulsating light intensified, nearly blinding me. I could no longer see the road ahead. All I could see was that intense glow, that eye-shaped beacon, watching me with an intensity that didn't seem human. Then I saw it. The driver, or whatever it was there. But it wasn't a man. His eyes, instead of being human, were dark, so deep they seemed to absorb all the light around them. He wasn't sitting in a seat but floated above it, like a shadow taking shape, an entity that shouldn't exist in a world like mine. I didn't know what to do. Every impulse in me wanted to turn around and run, but I was paralyzed, staring at that being as it stared back at me with a disturbing calmness. Suddenly, a deep voice, almost like an echo of the road itself, spoke. "You should have stopped, Hank. Now! It's too late." The woman beside me, who had seemed so distant before, was now next to me, her empty eyes fixed on the truck. She leaned toward me and whispered, "I warned you." With a muffled scream, the entity ahead began to move. Its eyes glowed with such intensity that I could no longer see anything around me. Only that glow, swallowing everything, pulling me into something I couldn't understand. The truck in front of me now felt like part of me, as if it were an extension of the fear that consumed my mind. I tried to slow down, but the cabin seemed to no longer respond. The steering wheel was sticky, as if it had been possessed by a force that couldn't be controlled. Fear took over, and it was as if I was heading toward an inevitable fate. The road now seemed to swallow everything around me. I no longer knew where I was. The dark truck ahead was pulling me in, and the woman beside me seemed to already know what would happen. She was leading me to something I couldn't escape, something not of this world. But the strangest thing was, as I got closer to that truck, I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt a strange sensation, like something was awakening inside me. A force connected to the road, connected to that dark truck, as if I were part of something much bigger, something that had begun long before I ever drove down that road. I was heading to a place where the rules didn't apply, and the closer I got, the more I felt my fate had already been sealed. Whatever I was about to encounter, I was already late. The truck in front of me was now so close that I couldn't tell where it ended and where the asphalt began. The road had completely vanished. The pulsating, intense, blinding light enveloped everything around me. I was immersed in a glow so strong that, for a moment, I thought my eyes were about to burn, to disintegrate under its intensity. But contrary to what I expected, I didn't feel pain, only a growing pressure, as if the air had turned into a viscous substance, slowly suffocating me. The truck's cabin was now completely silent, and the woman beside me seemed more like a spectator, as if she were somewhere else, watching what was about to happen. Her eyes were still fixed on the void, as if she knew the time had come but couldn't bring herself to care. She wasn't scared. She had already accepted what I still refused to understand. I tried to act, tried to turn the steering wheel, but the truck no longer responded to my commands. I was paralyzed, trapped in that place where there was no freedom to choose, where the road itself seemed to have become an extension of my soul. And then, with an abrupt motion, the dark truck in front of me began to disintegrate. It wasn't an explosion, nor a collision. It was as if the very structure of the truck was being dissolved by the air, swallowed by an invisible force. The cabin, the headlights, the engine, all vanished into the pulsating light, leaving only an emptiness where it had been. But the most terrifying part wasn't the truck disappearing. It was what appeared in its place. In the emptiness left behind by it, a door formed. A dark door, with its edges lit by the same pulsing light that had consumed the truck. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it shouldn't be there. It was an opening to something that wasn't of this world. Something without origin. Something that couldn't be explained. "You've arrived, Hank," the woman beside me said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Now!" It's the moment of truth. I looked at her, but she was different. There was something in her eyes, an emptiness that wasn't there before. She didn't seem human anymore. She seemed more like a part of what was happening, a piece in the twisted puzzle of the road. The door in front of me began to breathe, as if it were alive, slowly pulsating, waiting. I knew the road had led me here, but I didn't know what, or who, was on the other side. Something deep and unknown was calling me. Fear overtook me, but at the same time, something inside me wanted to move forward, wanted to step through. As if the door were the only way to escape a prison I hadn't even known existed until that moment. I didn't know what was real anymore. The rules of the road, the rules of the world, they didn't apply anymore. I wasn't driving toward the destination I knew. I was being guided to a place where time and space were malleable, where there were no boundaries, where there was no way back. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. The door in front of me seemed to swallow everything, as if it were the key to a reality beyond my understanding. I knew that by crossing it, I'd leave behind everything I knew, everything I understood. But the strangest thing was when I realized I didn't want to go back. Not anymore. There was something on the other side calling me, something that promised answers, or perhaps new horrors. I didn't know if I was ready for what awaited me, but it no longer mattered. Whatever it was, I was already inside the story. That's when I finally made the decision. I accelerated again. The truck couldn't resist the force, and without any control, the road twisted once more. The sound of my tires spinning blended with the pulsing of the door in front of me. Fear transformed into something bigger, something deeper. I was heading toward whatever it was, but at the same time, I felt that it was inevitable. Something told me I had already crossed the point of no return. The road wasn't a straight line anymore. It never was. It had always been a labyrinth, and now, the only thing left to do was walk toward the center. I didn't look back.